So, Dennis, let's start off. Talk to us about when you broke into boxing in New York in the late 70s and 80s. What made you in property developing and wanting to get involved in boxing?
Well, from the time I was a youngster, I saw my first fight at 7 years old. It was Jake LaMotta against Eugene Hairston. And the second fight I saw was Rocky Graziano and Sugar Ray Robinson. And I became addicted to boxing. I idolized Robinson. My father introduced me to him. And he was so gracious. He said, "Kid, I understand you have a good left jab. Let me see it." And I threw the left jab. And he said, "Gee, it looks like mine." And from that point on, I became addicted and started a love affair with boxing that lasted to this day. And in 76, at the Olympics in 76, we saw, well, actually, right prior to that, we signed Ronnie Harris, who won a gold medal in 1968, the year George Foreman won. We went down to Montreal, and we wound up signing the individual who won the Val Barker Award, may he rest in peace, Howard Davis. And we made a proposal for Sugar Ray Leonard, and a secretary who I didn't proofread forgot to add a 0 to the proposal. So we could laugh about it later.
Wow.
What might have been. And then we signed Jerry Cooney. So we signed Harris, Davis, and Cooney, and for about 3 years, they all remained, plus other fighters we signed, undefeated. I thought it was going to last forever, but even dreams, you wake up from dreams sometimes.
It could have been worse, though, pal. She could have had an extra 0, couldn't she?
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, that'd have been a bit of fun for you. So, how was it breaking into the New York scene then when you signed those fighters? Were there any resistance from the traditional promoters, or did you jump straight into it with no problems?
Well, we did it. I had early on made a decision that I wanted to really be able to go independent, and that was inherent with a lot of challenges, to say the least. It was a different atmosphere at the time. There'd be times we would be on a garden show. There were times I had to use crazy publicity antics. For example, in the case of Ronnie Harris, Ronnie was a great technical fighter.
But it was a little bit boring, sir.
What's that?
His style, Ronnie Harris's style, he was very skillful, but he wasn't a crowd-pleasing fighter.
He wasn't a crowd pleaser. He was technically a phenomenal fighter, but he was far from sensational, and he certainly wouldn't guarantee to take your breath away. He was very technical. So I had to develop to try to make him an attraction. And at the time, I knew no one in boxing. I called Bob Arum, and he insisted that it was Ronnie Harris from Detroit. I said, no, it's Ronnie Harris from Canton. He hung up on me and said, "Kid, you don't know what you're talking about." And then I did some crazy things to generate publicity. First of all, I made believe Ronnie, who was Afro-American, I said he was Jewish and he wanted to fight with a yarmulke. The commission got hysterical, and I wound up suing the commission to allow him to follow his religious pursuit. Needless to say, I won in the New York Supreme Court, and they had gotten a stay. Thereafter, we challenged the middleweight champion that he would play. Ronnie was an extremely bright guy, a college graduate, that he would play. If Rodrigo Valdez would fight him, he would whistle "America the Beautiful" during the round and play chess with Bobby Fischer in between rounds. We brought a gorilla to Madison Square Garden when they had promised that a fight with Sugar Ray Seales, and then they said that nobody would, they couldn't get anyone to fight him. He's a southpaw. And Teddy Brenner, who was a gruff individual, said, "Hey, I can't get anybody to fight this guy. He's a stinker. He's a southpaw." So on a Sunday, I said to myself, what can I do to get attention? I was new in boxing. I didn't know anyone. So I called up every newspaper, television, radio station, and said that on Monday morning, I was going to show up with a real live gorilla. And if there's a human being that was afraid to fight Harris, Harris had the courage of a lion and would fight the gorilla. It made the early edition of the Post, and there were 1,000 people waiting outside. Finally, Brenner had contacted my partner and said, "Get your crazy partner out of here. He's embarrassing Gulf and Western. We can't allow this." And he said, "All he wanted is what you promised him, a fight." And finally he said, "You got the fight. Get him out of here." And so Ronnie Harris became a household name in New York, where style-wise, or maybe even, he didn't have that outgoing personality, okay? But he really became an attraction. And that started a series of things that we did to generate exposure and to generate publicity for our fighters, which initially created a lot of opportunities for them.
Did you actually turn up with the gorilla then?
Oh, yes. My problem was, what do you do on a Sunday afternoon after I made all the promises that we were going to show up with it? You can't look in the telephone book and the dial a gorilla. So that's a whole other story. But the gimmick worked.
Can you imagine health? Can you imagine health and safety now trying to take a 700-pound gorilla to a gym?
So what year did you sign Ronnie Harris? Because when Ronnie won the gold medal at the Olympics, that was in 72. He beat 68. He beat one of our guys, John H. Tracy, who goes on to become world undisputed welterweight champion when he beats Jose Napoles. So how did you beef him up deliberately? Because he was boxing as a lightweight, as an amateurs, and boxing a middleweight in the pros.
No, actually, what had happened was we were introduced to him by a fellow by the name of Bill Tate, an ex-boxer, and who had been a referee in New York, knew Ronnie's family. And Ronnie had already had, I don't recall exactly, 15, 16, 17 fights. He was undefeated. Gil Clancy had him and just wasn't able to move him, okay? And he introduced me to him. At that point, he was frankly a middleweight. I'll tell you an interesting story. I brought him to Gleason's, and I had him spar with a guy whose name at the time was Eddie Gregory, who's become Eddie Mustafa Muhammad.
Yeah.
And Eddie wanted
to sign, world champion.
Right. And Eddie wanted to sign with us. And foolishly, I had them box, and it was a great session. Ronnie got the edge, okay? And instead of signing both of them, which would have been the smart thing to do, I signed Ronnie. And of course, Eddie today is a very good friend of mine, and we laugh about that. But that was, he was already a middleweight at that point. And then we made a couple of small matches, got him to fight with Sugar Ray Seals. And then we got an offer, an opportunity to come to England and
he beat Alan Minter on cuts in 77.
Yeah. It was considered a pretty big upset at the time.
It was a massive upset.
What?
It was a massive upset.
Massive upset. And Mickey Duff would always tell me that he would always blame it on his partner. And he would say, if I was there, it would have never happened. And he would continue, wherever I saw him, he would tell me it would never have happened. And
he was blaming Mike Barrett.
Mike Barrett. And thereafter, we fought an elimination, which unfortunately got very ugly, against Gratian Toner. And foolishly, they put the dressing rooms right next to each other with a thin wall. And the entourages got in unfortunately, got into an ugly incident, and a fight broke out before the fight, and it was on primetime CBS. So as Toner, who was with Jean-Claude Bardier, the former French champion, I think he was European champion, and some of his people, and as the CBS is screaming, "Get them into the ring!" And as they walked into the ring, it was an ugly scene because the Toner people were very bloodied. It was very unfortunate. The Harris entourage group thought that they were fooling around with the gloves, and unfortunately, a fight ensued. If that didn't happen, Harris would have turned out to have been middleweight champion because the fight was scheduled for Monte Carlo, the winner. And they were afraid for us to go to Monte Carlo because of some background of the people who had Dona's place from Marseille, France. But that's a story better left untold.
Can you imagine?
Argentina turned out to be a nightmare. They were gracious before the fight. They were terrific. And the day of the fight, going to the arena in Luna Park, they tried to overturn the car. They surrounded us with machine guns. I was in Harris's corner, and they said, "You're going to have to leave." And I said, "I manage him. There's nothing in the world that's going to get me to leave." And some guys cops came with machine guns. And I wasn't exactly a profile in courage because when they surrounded me with machine guns, I left. Thereafter, his brother got into a situation. And frankly, the people that used to be in jail were now the police. And he resisted a little bit, and they would take him out, and we believe he would have never been seen again. So we had this fellow Tate and Bobby Patterson, his sparring partner, were so shell-shocked, they locked the dressing room door, and it took them an hour after the fight to open up the door because of the ugliness that took place. But frankly, in any area that would have been normal, and if it would have turned out to be Monte Carlo, there was no way that Coro had the ability to beat Harris. But that's a frustrating story. That was.
It was a split decision. That fight was a split decision.
Yeah,
and
in Buenos Aires.
If it was, I know. If it was anywhere else, you'd have got that. You'd have got the decision.
Yeah, it was, and to be perfectly frankly, it really shouldn't have been as close as it was. Okay, but I think that Ronnie, between having the car almost turned over and hearing the screaming and being somewhat aware of what happened to his brother, and Victor Valley, who was working the corner, they wouldn't let him stay by the ring. They put him the first row ringside, so every time the bell rang, he had to run, to get in the corner. It was a horrible situation. I'm unfortunately, I'm not a very forgiving person. And the only person that I never got even with, which I always promised I would have been the guy who promoted the fight. And since then, he's passed on. But other than that, I believe revenge is the sweetest type of reaction. Unfortunately, I'm not the class individual who likes to forget.
Like to keep hold of a grudge.
Revengeful.
Yeah, like to keep a grudge. So is that the? I mean, you and your partner got a reputation. You got a couple of nicknames in the 80s. It was either the Gold Dust Twins, which sounds pretty nice, or the other one was the Wacko Twins because of the stuff you did. Was the guerrilla the craziest thing you did?
Oh, we did a number of things. It's funny. A great columnist who really knew boxing gave us originally the nickname the Gold Dust Twins because our fighters remained undefeated and they were doing well. And that was a fellow by the name of Bob Waters, really knew boxing. Somebody else, Bruce Trappler, I think it was, because of some of the publicity stunts and other stuff, gave us the nickname Wacko Twins. And some of the things we did was, with Jerry, we had him, a leprechaun get into the ring. Funny story, the first time, the little fella, I don't know if that's politically correct, was very nervous and got sick in the dressing room and everything else. And the next fight, and it made the back or the front page of the Daily News. The next time we were supposed to be fighting a fellow by the name of McGill in the county center. I didn't realize we created a monster. Since his picture was in the papers, he became a diver. So I go up the day of the fight. The fellow who had, one of the commissioners was Marvin Cohn. He said, "We've got a serious problem, Dennis." I said, "Problem? What is the problem?" He said, "McGill wrote a 6-page letter that he's very superstitious and about leprechauns. And you can't have a leprechaun go into the ring." Now, I want to crack up. I think it's insanity. And I say, show me in the rule book, being against a leprechaun is like being against Santa Claus. Show me in the book. Well, obviously, there was nothing about leprechauns in the New York State Athletic Commission rule book. So we made a deal that the leprechaun could go into the ring, could dance a little around, but couldn't wiggle his fingers to hex McGill. Now, thinking how scared the leprechaun quote was for the fight at the Garden, I didn't think there was a problem. Make a long story short, he became a monster since everybody had seen him and he was made the front page of the papers the previous fight. And the leprechaun, quote unquote, was jumping in the ring, wiggling his fingers. Cohn said, Rappaport, your license is at stake. McGill hit his eyes because he didn't want to be X'd. And fortunately, the fight did take place. My license wasn't suspended. And Jerry stopped Sam McGill. So we did
Dennis.
that. Yes.
Oh no, sorry, go on, let you finish.
Well, then we had Howard Davis give a long stem rose to his opponent, okay, in his first professional fight. I had made a deal directly with CBS. It was probably the first time in history that a deal was made directly with the televisions for the television rights. And usually in those days, fighters' first 10, 11 fights were, they paid $100 a round. I mean, they didn't get a lot of money. And we signed a contract for $1.6 million for his first 12 fights. And now this is 1976, 1977. It was, I called him up that night, and Howard was living in a project. And I said, you became a millionaire today. Okay. And it was a great story. In fact, we signed him with this TV contract, and it was actually more than the charismatic Sugar Ray Leonard had gotten with ABC. But when we first spoke to CBS, they were unsure. They really wanted to sign Leonard. So I went to ABC for a meeting, and I met with Howard Cosell and one of the executives. They had just signed Leonard. They had no interest in Davis. But I assumed that there were some executive spies. The meeting lasted 5 minutes. I didn't want CBS to be aware that there was no interest. So I went into the men's room. I must have stood there for about an hour to kill time. I then went into Gleason's gym, and I couldn't have been there more than 3 minutes, and I got a call from CBS. And they said, we want to meet with you immediately. I said, why? They said, we want to make a deal. And then they said those magical, phenomenal words to me. Money is no object. Now, I was in and been in the real estate business my whole life. But the words, money is it won't be an object, was like a song, a beautiful song to my ear. I went up there, and about 12 o'clock at night, we signed in longhand a contract. And I got everything I wanted, including control over who we would fight and some other goodies. And I think Sports Illustrated called it the contract of the year.
How much did he get in advance? Because I remember Howard Davis was a star of the Olympic team in '76, and it was like you had the Spinks brothers on there, you had Sugar Ray Leonard on there. It was amazing for what he did, because he won the Val Barker Trophy. And after that, it was like Howard Davis, unfortunately, didn't fulfill his real potential. Do you think if you didn't pay him that money up front, that maybe he would have become a better fighter?
Well, to be really candid about it, it was a blessing and it was a curse. My job, really was to maximize the dollars for the fighter in negotiating a deal, but also was to develop the fighter. And there were a couple of problems. Howard was a dazzling amateur. When I first saw him in the Golden Gloves, his footwork, his speed, I mean, it was really a thing of beauty. And that's why we were so excited to sign him. However, what happened was his father, who really was a basically a good guy, was his trainer. And his background was he trained some kids in the boys club and maybe 1 or 2 pros. And he had 3 professional fights, and he was knocked out each time in the first round. So to make a long story short, I wanted to bring in a real trainer to work with him. The father could have been, quote, the head, but let me bring somebody in that really knew what they were doing. And he felt too threatened. I remember one day over my house, I showed Howard what to do if you get trapped against the ropes, how to spin the opponent. The next day, the father said, why am I showing him that? He's not supposed to be against the ropes. I said, wait a second. I said, this is not by design. Sometimes it happens. He's not supposed to be against the ropes. And then what happened was, unfortunately, because of the monies that we were getting on TV, he didn't want to keep him, okay? Didn't want to what he viewed to take the chance for him to fight off TV. Now, when you got a fighter who's basically, Howard wasn't a big puncher, but had phenomenal reflexes and tremendous speed, it's vital for a fighter like that to keep active. First, to develop him from a PR standpoint, and 2, to develop him. And then we had a young fighter, and father only wanted to fight on TV, which really hampered, unfortunately, his progress. And the lack of a trainer, also a lack of a professional trainer, was a hindrance. So he was an extraordinary human being. His untimely death was a heartbreak, because he was probably the cleanest living individual. He never smoked, he never drank. He was a great human being, and unfortunately, he died of lung cancer. And but he might have been among the best amateurs in history. Together with an elite group of 3 or 4 or 5 guys, he was on top of that mountaintop. But he never realized the potential, and it was ironic because a fighter who he defeated, he beat Tommy Hearns and Aaron Pryor. An interesting story with Pryor. Before Pryor turned pro, he went to Howard Davis's father's gym and came to my real estate office and wanted me to sign him. And he really was after me. And I didn't want I had just signed a CBS contract with Davis. And Howard's father thought that that Pryor would sign with him. And I didn't want to appear like I'm looking to undermine or take away his fighter. Make a long story short, the father, and Pryor never signed with the father. And Pryor went pro. And one day I'm out at a hotel in Vegas, sitting on a bench. It was one of these boutique hotels. It was with another infamous guy by the name of Harold Smith, who put a bunch of people there. And Aaron Pryor is walking out, and the guy who managed him, who was a lovely guy, by the way, who had a number of pizza places in Cincinnati, named Buddy LaRosa. And as he's walking out, I'm sitting on the bench. Pryor looks at LaRosa and says, "That's Dennis Rappaport. That's the guy that I wanted to really manage me." And I felt so embarrassed for LaRosa, who was a sweetheart of a guy. But I often wonder what might have been if I did sign him. But who really knows?
Yeah. Dennis, you mentioned then about selling Howard, and obviously to go to another fighter who you worked with, memories what we want to hear a little bit from. You certainly didn't need selling with Roberto Duran. Can you tell us a few of the memories alongside working with Roberto Duran?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
I'm sorry, could you tell us a few of your memories working alongside the great Roberto Duran?
Duran?
Yeah, could you just give us a
Yeah,
few
I promoted a few. I promoted a few of Duran fights. I promoted a number of Camacho fights. I had Camacho we had promoted Camacho for a while. Between heavyweight champions, between those that I managed or those that I promoted to varying degrees, some a few fights, some over a long period of time. had really 5 heavyweight champions. I was blessed in that I probably have known most of the fighters and most of the legends for many years in the heavyweight division and many of the lower weight divisions. And it's been a phenomenal ride filled with, for a 7-year-old that loved the sport and then got involved in it. And its best, boxing is a renaissance, is a Picasso, is poetry in motion. And unfortunately, at its worst, it can be a cruel and ugly sport. And there's room for a lot of improvement. And the fighters and the proud warriors are living in the dark ages. No pension plans, no medical benefits. So many things that are missing. And there's such hypocrisy and inconsistencies and hypocrites and sanctioning organizations that are, the only rule is that there are no rules. So there's a lot of areas where the sport really needs improvement. Some of the judging recently has been horrific. The lack of consistency in jurisdictions. There are many, many areas that could be improved and that should be improved. Because as I said, you can have a Picasso, okay? You can have something that's so beautiful, okay? And you can have something ugly and cruel. I prefer to have the sweet science be as sweet as it really is.